You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Ted Dixon, CEO and co-founder of IncResearch.ca, Canada's first online financial news and research service. Welcome to the show for Easter, Ted.
Well, happy Easter to you and all your listeners, Jim.
So what did we get in the basket when they presented the federal budget earlier in the week?
Well, it was certainly a mystery basket. Everyone was waiting to find out what the new Liberal government had in store, and there was a lot in there. There was something in there just about for everyone, both those who were inclined to cheer for the new government and those who were inclined to boo the new government. So there's certainly no shortage of items in there. So let's in terms of some of the negatives, let's kind of get that out of the way, because no government is perfect, and there always is room for improvement. What some of the criticism we've heard is that of course they've gone beyond their $10 billion in deficit spending. Well, personally, I don't think that's a big surprise, given the economy deteriorated significantly between the start of the election campaign and today. So the fact that they went over their projections, I think any government who would have taken over the reins, even if the previous government had been reelected, their targets would have been off. So there's a good article by the C.E. Howe Institute in the Huffington Post for those who are concerned about the deficit. They take the view that the government's probably spent too much. I'm not in that camp, but there's certainly those who are out there who can articulate a strong message that way. I think one of the, there are a couple of, wasteful items in there. Every government's going to waste some money, I'm afraid, and this government's going to be no exception. I kind of shudder at the $675 million going to the CDC over 5 years. That's an organization that has, I think, failed to deliver any sort of creative way at spurring independent production, independent distribution of Canadian content, insular, inwardly focused, and I don't see any changes in that on the horizon. I hope that $675 million will come with some strings attached, that they will have to engage with the private sector and not do it all in-house, and hand out big checks to their buddies. I'm going on a bit of a rant here, but of all the things in the budget that probably irked me, that's probably the biggest. The CBC for some reason decides they're going to make careers for people, whether it's David Suzuki or Kevin O'Leary, but there are a lot of independent content providers who they could be working with, and instead of trying to create a few superstars, perhaps they will use some of this money to engage in a number of smaller producers and a broader cross-section of the private sector. So we'll have to see how that plays out. The government did say that it would come with some type of accountability requirement, and I hope that the opposition will press them for including more producers, in private sector producers alongside their public infrastructure that they're going to be building with this new cash.
One of the complaints I've heard from CBC personnel, though, is you're right about bureaucracy. It seems that they have committees of 5 to 10 people deciding where the one reporter will go for the day. And
it shows in their coverage, too, which is pretty average given all the money they have, I would say. When the last time we had an earthquake in British Columbia, they were it took them a long time to get on the air and start covering it. It was pathetic coverage, actually.
What do you like about the budget?
Okay, so there's a lot of good things in this budget, and I think one of the biggest innovations is the child benefit. This is a big deal for the Canadian economy. It's a big deal for families who are earning $150,000 a year, because it will be money directly in their pockets that won't get taxed away as in the previous child benefit regime. And even more importantly, for those who are making under $30,000, they're going to get a lot of cash. for a child under 6, that type of a family will get $6,400. I mean, that is a big deal. And you know what, Jim? These people in that situation, they're going to spend that money. It's not going to be parked away into a safety deposit box. It's not going to be, it's not going to be used to go on a trip to Hawaii next Christmas, outside of the country. This is going to be money that's going to be spent here in the local economy. So it's a pro-growth budget. We're going to see a positive impact on the economy right away, and in a way that benefits families. It's not being, this money is not being handed out to bureaucrats. Aside from what I just mentioned, on the CBC, most of the new money in the budget, most of the spending is going into the economy directly in a way that's going to be decided by Canadians and other economic actors. So I certainly applaud the government's approach here on the child benefit. It's a really neat innovation, and it's going to benefit both the broad economy, including small business. If a middle income, lower income family gets a bit more cash, they're going to probably spend it right in their own neighborhood. They're going to spend it close to home, and that usually means a small business. So by stimulating the economy through this way, and we're not talking digging a hole and then filling it back up again. This is a very good way to deal with a number of issues: inequality, economic stagnation, and tax fairness. It's a very good step by this government. So that's probably the big ticket item in the government, and also I think a major improvement on what we had before. Big winner is going to be transit over the long haul, and what I really like about the approach here, Jim, is that they're doing it in 2 phases. And the first phase, to get the money out the door, it's going to be for operating and maintenance, so that it takes a bit of the load off the municipalities. The federal government's going to come in and kick in 50% of maintenance and operating identified expenditures here, up to tune of $461 million in British Columbia, which is a fair amount of change. But then once you get past the 2 years, they're going to be looking at larger projects with a lot more cash. But they're devising a framework that will be evidence-based, they say, in terms of how these projects will be decided to be funded. That is very key. So the important thing to be looking for forward on this project is how will these projects be evaluated in terms of this whole initiative to boost transit in Canada. So very good approach, a good start, and the proof, will still be in the pudding for the phase 2. But the government seems committed and they're taking the right approach. And certainly, there's some people that may have been a bit disappointed that the money wasn't there to start, a subway to UBC next year. But I think that they are administering policy across Canada, they have to make sure that from coast to coast to coast, that when they put these kind of investments in, they're done in a framework that's accountable and achieves hopefully productivity enhancing outcomes for Canada.
Do you think it's going to help BC to have a prime minister who has lived in Vancouver, worked in Vancouver, and doesn't view the West Coast as a bunch of dope-smoking, sandal-wearing, tofu-eating hippies?
Well, Jim, I think you've got the first part of the equation correct. Justin Trudeau did work in Vancouver, but he also did quite a bit of adventuring, and hiking and skiing outside of Vancouver. And I think that maybe some tofu eaters are pretty happy with the $17.1 million at Pacific Rim National Park improvements that have been targeted. So I think he's covered a few bases, and there may be some hippies and as you said, the tofu eaters who get their share of the pie here too. So he is putting his mark on British Columbia, and what all for British Columbia, and I think he's sending a pretty strong signal that British Columbia is not at all going to be an afterthought. This budget I think is 3/4 Bill Morneau and 1/4 Justin Trudeau, and you can see where Justin Trudeau's direct influence is here on things like investing in Indigenous infrastructure, investing in national parks, and we're going to get our fair share in British Columbia. That's for sure. Another big winner in the budget for BC is none other than our Premier. I really believe she scored in this budget by ensuring that LNG kept its accelerated cost allowances for the processing plants that are required to, for any of these LNG networks that are going to be set up. This wouldn't have been an easy victory for the Premier. I'm sure there would have been a lot of pressure to get rid of that allowance, particularly in light of the overall greenhouse gas target emissions reduction pledges that the government has made. But that was kept. That was a measure that was brought in by the Harper Conservatives. It didn't get a lot of attention. It was one of probably the best, one of the best sort of initiatives the previous government did for British Columbia in terms of any single initiative. That was a big one. And getting the current government, the new government, to keep that was a big deal. So LNG is going to be a big winner here if they can, get a project off the ground, and a lot of that, of course, will depend on confidence in the outlook of the commodity price, which is beyond the control of the Premier, the Prime Minister, or even these industry participants. So, but it's giving BC a fighting chance to actually get an LNG export port done within the next couple of years.
I know the Japanese government has urged Canada to really get off the sidelines and get into the LNG game as soon as possible.
Well, as a consuming nation, it's in their interest to have as many producers competing for their business as possible. Australia has been beating us to the punch, although now we're seeing evidence that some of their projects are being rolled back. So certainly for Japan and China, the more players, the merrier. And I should say the other interesting element in this budget is not only are they bringing back the Kitsilano Coast Guard station, but they're expanding it to be a world-class oil response system. And that's very interesting because that meets one of the Premier, that conceivably could meet one of the Premier's 5 conditions for approval of the Trans Mountain Pipeline. So, Justin Trudeau is certainly he's certainly taking an approach that clearly keeping British Columbia in mind and has really kind of dug down into a few BC issues. And another example of that is buried way in the deep in the budget papers is, now get this number, Jim, $444.4 million for new CRA tax auditors.
Canadian Revenue Agency auditors.
And where do you think a lot of that money will be headed for? I don't think it's going to be parked in PEI and northern Labrador. I think a lot of those auditors are going to be coming right here to Vancouver and Toronto, and we will see. But I think one of the big losers in this budget will be tax cheats, particularly in those looking to take advantage of speculative markets, which some have described. The state of the Vancouver real estate market as being at a speculative phase. So I think there's a bit of a message there about more resources coming to clamp down on some potential tax cheating that may or may not be going on in the real estate market right now. We will have to see. But it was an interesting and a very significant allocation for tax auditors in the budget. That's for sure.
Should there have been a speculation tax in real estate? For example, if you sold a home for any other than emergency reasons within a year, you pay a tax on it?
What I would like to see first, to cool down the market, but to bring integrity in the market. I don't think it's the government's job to cool down the real estate market. What I think it's the government's job is to make sure there's integrity in the market and there's no price manipulation, and that interest rates are set appropriately to reflect the supply and demand of capital in the country. Now, the Bank of Canada, unfortunately, is responsible for the first. I say unfortunately because they're not accountable to anyone, it seems, so they're going to do whatever they want. But in terms of bringing integrity into the market, all we have to start doing as a first step is to enforce the rules that are on the books, such as money laundering rules. There are money laundering rules on the books. They have not been enforced. And if we could at least get that going and make sure that people in any market, but particularly the real estate market right now, because it seems to be an area that has attracted a fair amount of interest by money launderers, I would argue, is that these rules are going to be enforced vigorously, and I think that would go a long way to bringing up a feeling or restoring a sense of integrity to the market. And let's do that before we try and come up with a speculative tax. Because if you get it wrong, you can hurt a lot of people in the process that don't, that don't deserve, getting that kind of a tax hit. So let's start with the rules on the books that are currently being basically unenforced.
We'll have more with Ted Dixon right after the break.
Unbelievable harmony, spectacular performance, the ultimate tribute to the Everly Brothers and Simon and Garfunkel. Bird Dog and the Vintage Electric Band coming to Mission, White Rock, West Vancouver. Buy online and save at ontourtickets.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Ted Dixon. Ted, if you could be finance minister for a day, what would you have put in the budget?
Well, I think because you have to live with a budget for more than a day, I don't think I would be able to provide a reasonable answer for that. If leaving someone else to carry the can of something that I would do, but I would do a complete tax reform and get rid of a lot of these boutique tax credits that the previous government brought in, and even the new government brought in its own boutique tax credit for teachers. So I would get rid of all of that. But there is hope that the government may move in that direction. They have said they're going to be looking at that, but I will not hold my breath for that. The closer you get to an election, so if they don't do it next year, I don't think it'll ever get done. But that's certainly what I'd be targeting. But in general, I think the budget should be positive for the Canadian economy. Next year will be an important year to see how the government deals with innovation, research, and development. We'll have to see. They're still working on it. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. They are talking about innovation clusters. I'm not a big fan of government trying to identify which cluster is going to be successful and which cluster is not. But we'll see. There's plenty of time for Canadians to get engaged, I think, with the Liberal government here on how to improve Canada's innovation and productivity. The government's recognized it's a problem, which is good. So let's see how they deal with it. I'll be very interested to see how they progress on that file. But in terms of what they've done in their first 6 months here on the job, I think it's quite substantial. You can only push so much policy out the door in your first 6 months, and they've really done a lot of heavy lifting here, particularly given the state of the Canadian economy. The child benefit is a great innovation. It'll help the economy, and it'll bring in a bit more revenue and put in people's pockets. Will it help Canadian stocks in the stock market? It should help a little bit. I think, though, interestingly, some of the big winners, relative, and I mean I shouldn't use the word big to suggest a windfall, because that's not the case. Well, one of the relative winners will be banks and insurance companies, only because the government, I think, is going to be successful in stopping this sort of deflationary talk and chatter, which the Bank of Canada was sort of doing to itself by raising this prospect of a global deflation. The government has done quite a bit to stop that, and I think, if anything, we may see longer-term interest rates start to creep back up, provided there's no global shock. That'll help insurance companies and banks in terms of their earnings. So it's not like they're being handed a gift or anything like that. It's just that if you get a more pro-growth environment in the Canadian economy, then those types of investments tend to do better. Now, of course, if oil heads back down to $50, none of this budget is going to help. You're going to get hit by another tsunami of falling oil prices, problems in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Labrador, and there's just Newfoundland, and there's nothing the federal government can do about it except react with its with the short-term measures. But if we can at least assume that we've stabilized in the oil patch, if not, starting to make some progress there, then this budget is going to give a nice little jump to the Canadian economy. they're not overdoing it. I heard Jenny Kwan on the other day complaining that the government's not doing enough. And of course I've heard other commentators say they're doing too much. So it looks like Bill Morneau's kind of hit the ball right down the fairway here. And it's a budget that reflects the current state of the Canadian economy and addresses it. So it's a good job. They've done a pretty good job. Aside from some obvious areas that they could have left alone, or such as I think they probably went a little bit overboard on their CBC funding, and but we'll have to see how that plays out.
Ted, the day that they have a budget that pleases everybody is the day I book a skiing trip on the dark side of the moon.
That is correct, and that'll be the same day that both you and I win the Lotto 649 jackpot as well, right, on the same draw.
Ted, thanks a lot for talking to us, and have a great long weekend.
You too, Jim.
My guest has been Ted Dixon, CEO and co-founder of InkResearch.ca, Canada's first online financial news and research service. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at Talk Digital Net. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Comments or questions can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.